Ambassador Alexia Corvus stepped out of the grav lift and into the mirrored foyer of the Atriarch Commonwealth's Grand Confluence Hall, pursing her lips at her reflection. She had learned long ago that a diplomat's most reliable armor was composure, yet the faint sheen on her brow, betraying a pulse that felt much too fast, told a truer story. The Terran Federation's hopes for an end to the Rimward trade embargo rested on the next few hours. At stake were shipping lanes, medical exports, and, less officially, the quiet intelligence alliance that both sides denied existed. At the far end of the foyer, a dozen metallic spheres hovered in a staggered formation, rose-gold hulls gleaming beneath the chandeliers. Peace drones, the Atriarchs called them. Camera-studded, protocol-bound, incapable of harm. They were the visual pledge that tonight's reception would be strictly ceremonial. No crimson-uniformed soldiers, no charged particle weapons, nothing more lethal than the flutes of fizzing trellium that servers offered on crystal trays. Alexia let the drones drift past her, while aides bowed and major domos announced titles. The drones emitted faint tonal pings, analyzing and logging every guest, their azure status lights blinking in reassuring sync. She smiled politely, thinking how much friendlier a war machine looks once you swap its gun mounts for light projectors. Yet each orb still housed a plasma manifold, a gyroscopic stabilizer, and targeting LiDAR hardware that, by military specification, could track a mosquito at midnight across a hurricane. The peace protocol buried the code, not the capacity. And precisely because everyone trusted the drones, no one had posted proper sentries in the hall. The Terran Security Directorate had sent her a packet the previous week, a compressed library of contingency subroutines, ostensibly a debugging toolkit for the Atriarch operating system. Unpacked, the code was something else entirely, an arsenal of self-modifying combat macros, enough to turn the drones from floating decker into a micro-battalion. Alexia had not told the Directorate that she used to dream and assembly code during her cadet days. She needed no technician to understand the offer. She also needed no lecture about what would happen if the Atriarchs discovered she had smuggled weaponized firmware into their capital. An ornate bronze leaf door opened. The reception proper awaited inside, a high-vaulted chamber whose prismatic panes cast shifting rainbows across marble floors. A string quartet of insectoid Raktari musicians rasped gentle harmonies on crystalline chimes. The chords drifted like mist, softening conversation into convivial hush. Senators sipped aperitifs, ambassadors traded barbed pleasantries, and somewhere in the throng, the Commonwealth Chancellor, Varesh Dankal, dazzled reporters beneath a waterfall of holographic lilies. Alexia's Terran aides peeled off to mingle. She took a lonely breath, fingers brushing the cufflinks on her jacket, each a disguised quantum key transmitter no bigger than a rice grain. The Directorate's engineers had embedded a whisper mesh antenna into the lining of her sleeve. All she had to do was lean within 4 meters of a drone, tap a sequence on her wristcom, and the drone's firewalls would hallucinate a firmware update they themselves had requested. But espionage was never about the how, it was about the when. She needed clear motive, a trigger event that could justify what the Directorate was pushing her to do. Uploading the code preemptively would mean violating the treaty she was sworn to uphold. Uploading too late could mean Terran bodies on the marble floor. She wandered among the buffet tables, exchanging banalities. The hum of conversation hid her muttered diagnostics. "Drone net running V4.2, CRC intact," she whispered, glancing at her wristcom. "Latency 10 milliseconds, fail-safe channels, quiet. So far, so peaceful." A ripple of tension brushed the back of her spine. She turned. Across the hall, a cluster of catering staff carried silver domes toward the dais where Chancellor Varesh would surely deliver his welcome toast. Nothing unusual, except that each server's left sleeve bulged in a way starch fabric could not fully disguise. Barrels, maybe. The caterer's collars also concealed discreet comm beads, illegal for civilian contractors in the capital. Alexia's stomach tightened. Her personal earpiece chimed, encrypted, hushed static, resolving into the voice of Director Yoon. New intercept. Plausible threat inside venue. Stand by. Alexia's eyes moved to the hovering peace drones, perfect vantage points above every doorway and balcony. If an assassination team did strike, uploading the Directorate's subroutines could flip the odds from massacre to containment. Yet the moral arithmetic tormented her. Save lives by betraying trust, or trust a fragile peace and risk letting a bullet end it forever. The buffet line curved her near Drone 7, bobbing equidistant between desert towers. The orb's bronze surface reflected her features, distorted like a funhouse mirror. She inhaled, exhaled. One brush of her cufflink and the handshake would begin. "Ambassador Corvus," a mellifluous voice interrupted. Chancellor Varesh himself, resplendent in teal robes trimmed with living bioluminescent thread, offered a hand. His 4 irises, flecked with silver, studied her with wry amusement. "We have not yet exchanged pleasantries. Are the accommodations satisfactory?" "Exquisite," she replied, masking turmoil behind a practiced smile. They walked together toward a terrace that overlooked the city's cascade of nighttime lights. "I understand your artisans coded the drone's choreography to sync with the quartet's tempo. Ingenious." Varesh chuckled. "A small gesture. When machines work in harmony, perhaps our nations can follow." He tilted his head. "I sense, however, something unsettles you." The Atriarch's empathic micro-expressions were famously acute. Alexia almost confessed everything then: assassins, hacking, fear, but duty chained her tongue. "Just the usual pre-negotiation jitters," she said. Her wrist comp pinged, the Directorate repeating, "Threat high, act if able." The servers reached the dais. Plates clinked. The quartet transitioned to a new movement, its chord unusual, a minor interval with a subsonic pulse that vibrated unpleasantly in Alexia's sternum. She frowned. Subliminal signals? She tapped her cufflink twice, the silent alarm code to the Terran security attachments stationed outside. A server lifted a cloche, steam billowed, and beneath the lid gleamed, not hors d'oeuvres, but a matte black cylinder covered in focusing coils. Several guests gasped. One of the servers tossed his tray aside and drew a compact coil rifle from his sleeve. Time collapsed into instinct. Alexia pressed her cufflink a 3rd time. The bronze orb overhead blinked from azure to crimson. Subroutine, upload initiated. Bytecode cascaded through the drone mesh, penetrating root directories the Atriarch engineers had sworn were tamper-proof. Safeties flicked from decorative to defensive. Target acquisition rails spun up with humming menace. The reception hall plunged into pandemonium. The assassins, there were at least 8, fanned out, rifles unfolding like origami into humming triangles of charged lattice. They fired first, narrow-band stun bolts crackling across the marble. A statue exploded in a cloud of dust. Guests shrieked, diving behind pillars. Drone 7's fuselage irised, revealing a micro-gimbal energy projector. A flash, one rifleman's weapon flew from his grip. Its superconducting coils slagged. Another drone unleashed a burst of adhesive pellets that webbed 2 attackers to a column. Alexia seized Chancellor Varesh's sleeve. "Down!" She shoved him behind an ornamental planter while the quartet's instruments shattered under crossfire. Their sonic chimes dissolved into shards. The drones executed the Directorate's layout. Overlapping fields, non-lethal where possible. Narrow beams knifed across the hall, targeting wrist joints, knees, trigger assemblies. Everywhere weapons clattered to the floor. But the assassins were disciplined. 3 hurled EMP grenades upward. 1 detonated against Drone 9, sending it spiraling, smoking. The orb crashed into a dinner table, splintering mahogany. Its systems already reconfigured self-immolated rather than be captured. Alexia's wristcom streamed telemetry. 5 drones still airborne. 3 partially damaged, but guidance algorithms adapting. She poked her head above the planter long enough to spot a rifleman weaving toward Varesh's hiding place, a vibroblade spinning in his grip. No drone had a clear angle through the foliage. Her diplomatic heels were useless. She kicked them off, sprinted, and intercepted the attacker at a side angle, catching his elbow with the edge of her forearm. In a maneuver half-remembered from officer school sparring, the blade skittered away, and she vaulted backward as Drone Ford lanced a tranquilizer dart into his carotid. He slumped, eyes rolling. Chancellor Varesh stared at her, not in accusation, but astonishment. "Ambassador, those drones, how—" "Later," she hissed, scanning for threats. Across the hall, one assassin still roared commands in an unknown dialect, detonating canisters that filled the air with opaque silver mist. Laser grids turned to soup in the particulate haze, forcing the drones to rely on thermal imaging. Subroutine Delta engaged, merging their data into a mesh that outlined the final assailant in ruby overlay. Drone 1 dove, hull plates unfolding to reveal grappling tendrils. It slammed into the rifleman, ensnaring arms and legs, then jolted upward, hoisting him high before dropping him onto a table already smothered in mist damper foam. Silence fell, punctured only by the hiss of extinguished coil guns and the ragged breathing of startled dignitaries. Rainbow light still twirled from the stained glass above, now mixed with burning circuitry sparks. Security detachments burst through the doors seconds later, too late to contribute. They found the drones hovering sentry over a hall littered with unconscious or bound attackers, shattered stemware glinting like fallen stars. Alexia rolled her shoulders, adrenaline making her limbs tremble. She tapped an override on her wrist comp, commanding the drones to stow weapons and return to passive mode. Their crimson lights faded to tranquil blue, as if the entire firefight had been collective hallucination. Chancellor Varesh rose from cover, robes soot-smudged but elegant. Guards swarmed him, but he waved them aside, crossing the debris-strewn floor toward Alexia. "I owe you my life," he said, voice soft, yet a current of steel lay beneath the gratitude. "And an explanation." Ambassadors from half a dozen star nations watched, ears poised for scandal. Alexia felt every gaze, the way one feels lasers on skin, silent, heated, searching for weak points. She straightened her jacket and met Varej's multifaceted eyes. "The Directorate provided contingency code," she said quietly. "I modified it to disable, not exterminate. Alpha priority was your safety and that of the delegates." Varesh's right iris darkened, a physiological indication of conflicted feelings. "You weaponized our peace symbols." "I liberated their potential," she countered, "and prevented slaughter. Your own security missed the conspirators." A low growl of engines outside announced landing skimmers bringing medical and forensics teams. Sirens wove faint counterpoint to the ruined quartet's silence. Varesh guided her to a less damaged alcove fringed with still intact holographic lilies. Two plainclothes advisors flanked him but kept a respectful distance. If news of this modification reaches the Council, they'll allege the Federation smuggled weapons onto sovereign ground. A casus belli. Alexia swallowed. The Directorate would hail her as hero. The Council might label her walking breach of trust. "Then we tell them the truth," she said. "Drones were repurposed under duress solely for defense, no casualties." She gestured at medical bots tending unconscious assassins. "Your laws value preservation of life above ritual. Let them see consistency." Varesh considered. He took a trembling breath. "You operated without authorization. So did the killers." She met his gaze. "Someone inside your security apparatus equipped them, knew the drone protocols were pacified, counted on an easy massacre. Whoever planned this wanted the talks dead as surely as us." The Chancellor's expression shifted from moral outrage to strategic focus. "You have evidence? Telemetric logs, targeting data, comm intercepts. The drones recorded everything." She tapped her wristcom to begin a secure transfer script of the actual combat code, but rich with forensic breadcrumbs. "But to give you root access, we can trace the conspiracy together, as partners." Noise rose around them, journalists, medics, aides collecting fallen datapads. Yet, for a heartbeat, they shared a fragile bubble of clarity. Varesh extended a slender hand. "Let partnership be our first answer to sabotage." His voice carried, turning heads. "Let the record show. The Commonwealth thanks Ambassador Corvus for swift action that saved lives tonight. Investigations began immediately. A murmur of relief spread. Cameras flashed. Alexia exhaled a lungful of tension. The subroutines purred dormant, awaiting deletion once handing over the logs. She suspected the Directorate would protest. Those routines had cost billions in black budget credits, but she would not keep them. Peace demanded a visible relinquishment of clandestine teeth. A triage drone drifted by, scanning her with gentle violet beams. "Minor abrasions, elevated catecholamines," it chirped. She waited on with weary amusement. As guests were escorted to secure lounges, Alexia watched technicians cart away the inert attacker she had tackled. Dust and glass sparkled on her bare feet. She had forgotten her shoes. She crouched, retrieved them from beneath a toppled chair, and slipped them on, ignoring the slight wobble from adrenaline and bruised toes. She found Drone 7 chassis dented, yet functional, hugging near a collapsed pillar, its status lights strobing amber. She reached out, palm against cool alloy. Weeks ago she had argued to the Directorate that trust is diplomacy's currency. You cannot pay for peace with fear alone. But tonight she had traded fear for lives, and the ledger was messy. Varesh joined her, hands clasped behind his back. "When I designed the drone's harmony routine, I imagined them as instruments." His voice carried a sigh. Tonight they were both symphony and shield. "An orchestra needs more than one conductor," Alexia said. She brushed dust from her lapel. "We still have a negotiation scheduled for dawn." A ghost of a smile touched Varsh's lips. "Indeed. And I suspect we will both arrive with renewed priorities." She began walking with him toward the hall's exit, where a corridor of security personnel awaited. Every step felt like returning from a cliff's edge, the drop still dizzying behind. She wondered whether the Directorate would scold or commend, whether the Atriarch Council would demand censure or validation, whether the galaxy would learn any lesson at all. But for now, the death toll stood at 0. That was no small diplomacy. Outside, twin moons cast overlapping halos on the plaza. Siren lights strobed crimson and blue, echoing the drone's earlier transformation. Alexia thought of the code still residing in their memory banks. Self-erasing countdown engaged. In 90 seconds, the routines would vanish, leaving no trace but the raw sensor data already copied to Varesh's secure channel. She felt strangely bereft, as if bidding farewell to comrades, or, encoded in lines of executable poetry, had served and departed in the span of heartbeats. Varesh paused beneath an arch studying the city's skyline. "When history asks how Terrans and Atriarchs began trusting one another, I will recall the moment your peace drones drew arms to defend us both." "They were your drones," she reminded him. He inclined his head, "But your faith altered them. Perhaps trust is not the absence of weaponry, but the choice of how and when to use it." He considered that. The Directorate's motto was anticipate hostility, but perhaps new doctrine could read convert hostility. You take instruments of ceremony, add a code of restraint, and turn them into guardians rather than butchers. The chill night air licked across the plaza. She reopened her wristcom, verifying deletion complete. All crimson indicators winked out. Only blue, the color of neutral posture, remained. "Subroutines gone," she told Varesh. "And negotiations still alive?" he replied. "Let's ensure they remain so." They moved forward, flanked by protective details now doubly vigilant, the battered but undefeated drones gliding overhead like metallic fireflies. Somewhere, distant bells marked the planetary midnight. Alexia glanced back once at the hall's shattered windows, at the copper-tinged shards refracting moonlight into shards. For a heartbeat, she saw not destruction but the raw facets of possibility, new angles from which future peace might refract. Then she faced ahead toward dawn, toward bargaining tables still unsplintered, toward the tenuous arc she and Varesh must bend, away from shadow. The night's firefight would become footnote or catalyst, either way, It had bought them time. And time, in diplomacy, was the rarest, most negotiable weapon of all.